If you tuned in to yesterday's episode, we sat down with John Costco from PFF, and one of the things that we both kind of in agreement on with the Cleveland Browns is there were certainly concerns about their secondary. Well, we don't know much, but what we do know from today's practice, probably only for the time being, increases those concerns. We'll talk a little bit about Joe Flacco. We will certainly talk a little bit about Isaiah Bond. All that and more on Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network, which begins now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things dog pound. Jeff Lloyd, your host. Sorry, we're trying to get some news on Denzel Ward. Was hoping that was something, but actually it was not anything. It was one of those easy pass lies text messages. We appreciate all of you who support us here at the OBR.com. Of course, your favorite Cleveland Browns content from our fantastic group of writers. While you're at the OBR.com, please look into the VIP package. It gives you access to the insider forums. It gives you access to Ask the Insiders. It is also bundled with subscription to Paramount Plus. If you are a UFC fan, that alone is worth its weight in gold, along with getting some of your favorite Cleveland Browns content. The continued support of the OBR streaming network is something we could not be more thankful for. Well over 10,000 subscribers now. Again, none of this happens without all of you coming out each and every day. The OBR streaming network begins every night at 6 p.m. Eastern with Browns 3D. Um, as I've told you, and as you've probably seen through social media, there are some changes going on. Pete Smith will be back tonight at 7 p.m. with a new host, Joe Mazzullo. I don't know Joe personally. I do know of Joe, and I think Joe's passion for the Cleveland Browns pretty much lines up with all of us here at the OBR. Just a little glimpse from the two of them. This should be fantastic. So make sure you don't miss it. And make sure you subscribe to the OBR on YouTube and I'm sure the OBR on Twitch. Today's practice started, and then there was a tad bit of a scare. Cornerback Denzel Ward unfortunately left practice early. The details are hazy at this point. You have to understand the Cleveland Browns, once they declared that they were going to handle this like an in season game week, that means the beat reporters are not allowed to divulge as much information that they've seen. They are certainly not allowed the access to record and then go ahead and put it out on social media. So we know it was a one on one drill. That's pretty much it. And we know Denzel, it was something either a shoulder, arm, elbow, hand. We don't know much more else. I don't know if he fell competing for a ball. We don't know if it maybe he was banged in to the receiver he was covering and something happened that way. So certainly this is all we truly know to this point is that Denzel Ward left practice early with some sort of arm injury. Now, when we spoke with John Costco yesterday, we pretty much put the emphasis on outside of Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome. Cameron Mitchell took 371 defensive snaps for the Cleveland Browns last year, and everyone else in that Browns cornerback room combined for 10 snaps in the regular season. So Denzel Ward missing any time in any way whatsoever is certainly the panic button for the Browns. Bad news. Super bad news. We suggested yesterday, and I've suggested for a couple of weeks now, one of the biggest concerns currently with the Cleveland Browns roster that nobody wanted to talk about was the cornerback room. They've been bringing in guys, and there's a undrafted free agent who they currently like, but it currently is in concussion protocol, and it's really difficult to find a path and have the assumption that an undrafted free agent is going to be in line for big time playing time early. Just makes sense. A guy like Asante Samuel Jr., who is scheduled to maybe meet with the Miami Dolphins, I'm not sure if he can get the Florida kid to maybe look past playing in his home state. But this is a guy I really think the Cleveland Browns really need to connect with. And the Browns, So much of Jim Schwartz's defense is predicated on man coverage and him getting his D line after the quarterback. Either the quarterback goes down, the quarterback has to throw the ball into the crowd, the quarterback he throws the ball errantly, which while we also spoke yesterday, we basically expressed the need for free safety help here. Ronnie Hickman, it's not that there's not faith in Ronnie Hickman. It's just hard to put a lot of faith in a guy that's someone that is not 100% proven. But Denzel Ward currently being down for this team is not a good thing in any way. We have not heard anything related to, obviously, Denzel Ward's head. We know there's been a concussion history with Denzel. All we know at this point is that it's something arm related. Stinger, bruise, strain. Again, it's all speculation. All we know is it is something arm related. Not good, certainly, for the Cleveland Browns' second best defensive player. Another injury update that we were waiting to hear from Saturday, swing tackle Cornelius Lucas was out of practice again today with an ankle injury. No update, just out of practice. At this point, if Cornelius Lucas needs to be put on ice until week 1 practices to prepare for the Cincinnati Bengals, I think the level and importance of his role warrants just that. Just put him on ice and get him ready for the opener. And hopefully he wouldn't even have to play, right? Maybe the Denzel Ward thing isn't that bad. And the only reason I'm going to preface that and even say that, and guys and girls, the irony of this, Christopher Maloney, if you don't know him by his given name, Detective Elliot Stabler, Flown Order SVU, was a spectator at practice today. And I'll be honest, if I was there, I absolutely would want to say hello and meet him. So maybe the fact that the beat writers were meeting and taking pictures with Detective Elliot Stabler is maybe necessarily a good sign that maybe Denzel Ward, whatever it is not that big of a deal. Again, way too early to tell. We recorded yesterday before the news had officially been put out there. And did it warrant an emergency episode? In my opinion, no, it did not warrant an emergency episode. Joe Flacco is your starting quarterback for week 1 against the Cincinnati Bengals. If you ask this guy, there is zero surprise there. The way it worked out, Kenny Pickett brought in first, Joe Flacco brought in second, then the 2 rookies drafted. Joe Flacco is your best option from day 1. A lot of that certainly has to do with the fact that Joe Flacco had a track record here in 2023. You got to see him perform within the Kevin Stefanski system. Certainly, the competition ended up not being that much of a competition. You had injuries for Kenny Pickett. You had an injury for Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders currently on the outside looking in with an oblique injury. Kenny Pickett is slowly getting back to work, working in to full team 11 on 11 drills, where that leaves Kenny Pickett in the possible status for maybe being in line for some playing time on Saturday in the preseason finale. Probably a little premature to tell at this point. So even though, again, the competition didn't end up being a competition, Coach Kevin Stefanski did go out of his way to say that basically Joe Flacco won the job. And in my opinion, I think when the Browns made the agreement with Joe Flacco, it probably was, hey, Joe, this most likely is your job unless you lose it. Joe has performed well through joint practices to this point. Obviously, he is the veteran and the captain, and maybe for Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders, the pseudo-father figure of that quarterback room. But it is Joe to be the starter for week 1. Naturally, some of the beat went to Coach Kevin Stefanski and said, well, you didn't say he was the starter for the season. And Coach Stefanski is never going to handle a question like that this far away. We're still 17 days away. So let's be honest. For Coach Stefanski, where there was a quarterback competition, to actually announce a starter 17 days before the actual game, For Coach Stefanski, that is giving us some information. We know Coach Kevin Stefanski is normally very, very discreet. He actually gave us the information well ahead of time. It's way, way too early to know what happens in week one, to have any understanding about whether or not Joe Flacco will be the starter week two. My guess is most likely Joe Flacco would be the starter week two. I don't know if Kenny Pickett in somehow, some way was healthy and Joe didn't have a good week one, that you would basically want to tell Kenny Pickett, hey, your first start for us is week two on the road in Baltimore. That's probably one where you want to going to give it to the guy who has been the veteran. Not to mention Joe's got, the ties there, the roots there. The situation certainly would not be too big for Joe Flacco. And there is no way you are going to give a first NFL start to Dylan Gabriel or Shador Sanders, possibly, on the road in Baltimore. Now, Joe spoke obviously today, and we're going to get to hear a lot of Joe over the next days and weeks as he is now QB1. Joe hinted that he thinks there's going to be a little playing time for him on Saturday in the preseason finale against the Los Angeles Rams. I spoke and I pretty much said on Sunday to you all, it's not the route I would go. But if you were going to play your starters a little bit, and Coach Stefanski is pretty much down the line referred to this as the dress rehearsal. So if the starting offensive line is going to play, if Jerry Jeudy is going to play, Cedric Tillman, David Njoku, Jerome Ford, Dylan Sampson, if these guys are all going to play and Joe wants to go get a little work, I cannot tell my QB1, no, you're not going to get some work. So if Joe wants to get a little work in the preseason finale, go for it. One drive, maybe two. You want to get a little creative and maybe just have Joe go out there and do a 2-minute offense, which is one of the most difficult things to replicate in practice. Go for it. Go ahead and go for it. It's not necessarily the route I would go, but then again, I'm not the one who's having to worry about my record being on the line. I think for Joe, this is probably special. You know what I'm saying? Joe was one of 3 people who are still in the NFL that were drafted during the 2008 NFL draft. Somebody brought up the question today, where were you in 2008? Well, in 2008, I had, at this point, a 1.5-year-old and a 6-month-old. The 1.5-year-old is about to move into college. The 6-month-old is about to begin her senior year in high school. So just think about that. And it tells you just how long Joe Flacco has been in the NFL. How do you handle the rest of the quarterback room on Saturday in the preseason finale? Health certainly has a lot to do with it. Is Kenny Pickett working his way towards being healthy enough to be an option to play against the Rams on Saturday? And if he is, I think the Browns would probably give Kenny Pickett a little time. Because right now, you have no way of knowing, and I know there's so much talk about whether or not the Browns should keep 4 quarterbacks or not. And do keep in mind, the Browns kept 4 quarterbacks on the original 53 last year. By the time they got to week 1 practices, they no longer had 4 quarterbacks on the roster. The question now could be, are you going to keep 4 quarterbacks on the roster? Because essentially, if you kept 3, and if you're like me, who thinks it would be Flacco, Gabriel, Sanders, or Flacco, Sanders, Gabriel, if you want to have it that way, you have no guarantee that Shador Sanders is going to be healthy. So it certainly creates a conundrum, which could lead to the Browns carrying 4 quarterbacks. And then once the room achieves 100% health, make your decision from there. If Kenny is healthy enough to play on Saturday, I think the Browns are going to give him a shot. I think as much as I would think the best thing to do with Kenny Pickett right now is to find him maybe a home where there might be a better situation for him, and the Browns can just take back a little bit of value. How I do think they'll play him because I think with Kenny, I guess it was July 26th when the hamstring started acting up and just really getting back to full practice today. I think the Browns kind of feel like, hey, he didn't really get the opportunity. So let's maybe get him some sort of opportunity. It could be that the Browns are just not 100% sold on the health of his hamstring, that they're not going to risk him playing live, 100% live against an opponent. Shador basically just did some small warm-up throws today. Basically was a spectator afterwards. So wherever he is with that oblique, which now we're talking a week. I'm sorry, actually it was last. So yeah, a week. So today would be day 7. Again, when it first happened and we first had the news of it, I told you it was tricky and we had no way of knowing just how long it was going to hold Shador out. So that could leave you with a scenario where Joe Flacco, if we're going by his words, does play a little bit. We know at least Dylan Gabriel plays some, or it could be Joe Flacco. It could be some Kenny Pickett. It could be some Dylan Gabriel. I just don't know that Shador Sanders is going to progress from being a non-participant in practice on Tuesday with an oblique to being green-lit to play in a live game on Saturday. That certainly could change. There's no question about it. So now that this competition at least is decided at the top, how is it going to work to go from 2, 3, 4? And my belief is maybe we're not going to have a true answer of who the quarterback 2 is, who the quarterback 3 is, even if there is a number 4 quarterback by the time the Cincinnati Bengal week begins. I just don't know. So that is kind of where we are at. What we know is Joe Flacco is the starter for the Cincinnati Bengal game. Other than that, you can't really give any clear and concise answers because we are dealing with some health issues as well. Just real quick, I'm assuming most Browns fans saw a little bit of it last night. And week 1 against the Cincinnati Bengals kind of looks pretty appetizing at this point. Cincinnati Bengals offensive line is struggling and struggling badly. What in the world Zach Taylor was thinking, leaving Joe Burrow in a preseason game behind a second-string offensive line? It's a fireable offense. Joe took a big hit. Granted, it was on him. He kind of, did the negative and drifted back in the pocket. His linemen kind of did their best Jedrick Wills impression and all kind of stood still. And then Joe took a pretty massive hit from about 575 pounds of defensive linemen. That's not even the worst part. The worst part was the Cincinnati Bengals defense. Gashed. The Washington Commanders could have driven a Toyota Camry through the holes their offensive line was creating against the Bengals defense. This Bengals team could be in a really, really bad way. And Bengals games this year, you could see a lot of 41-38s right now. The defense, and it's not getting any better with Trey Hendrickson. And I'll be honest with you, if I was Trey Hendrickson on standing on the sidelines watching that team perform last night, even if the Bengals came to me and met my contractual demands, I think I would say, nah, I'm good. I'm out because I don't even know what Trey Hendrickson could do for that defense. That's how bad that defense looked last night. They can't tackle. Gaping holes. The Browns, week 1, might not have to throw the ball more than 10 times. If I was Quinshon Judkins, I'd be begging for whatever contract the Browns could give me right now so I could be ready to go week 1. If the Browns can run the ball like the Browns truly used to be capable of running the ball, that defense that I saw last night and the week before, Browns could put up 3 bills on the ground against this team. I'm not even lying. 300 yards. That's how bad that defense looks. We kind of got our formal introduction to wide receiver Isaiah Bond. Bond began his media session, and although he wasn't necessarily speaking from cue cards, it certainly was a prepared statement. And kudos to him for it. A lot of people, it seemed like he really practiced this. I hope so. This media is certainly not easy to deal with. And Bond probably wanted to make sure He used the correct words and certainly mentioned what he felt needed to be mentioned. Thanked his agency, certainly thanked the Cleveland Browns organization for the opportunity. Again, it gets so difficult when you have to talk about these players who are certainly within, and went through legal situations. But for now, we turn the focus on just to letting the young man be the player that is currently a rookie wide receiver coming to this team late in the game in the middle of training camp. I think you can see some exuberance in Isaiah Bond's eyes. I think you saw just the fact that he was excited that this opportunity has now finally come for him. He certainly spoke of the relationship he has with Cleveland Browns offense coordinator Tommy Rees, which probably certainly was an asset to get him here. I'm sure Tommy Rees was approached by the Browns about his personal thoughts on Isaiah Bond. And you would think if Isaiah Bond is here, Tommy Rees obviously probably came with some positives in regards to Isaiah Bond. He mentioned, that he does not want to be viewed as a gadget player, which I think a lot of people, when you have a player, and Bond was unique this way, you know, right about this time 1 year ago, Isaiah Bond was about to begin the season with the Texas Longhorns. And he was kind of viewed as the really attractive transfer option into that Longhorns wide receiver room. As the season went on, there was another less talked about transfer at the time in that Texas Longhorns wide receiver room. His name was Matthew Golden, who had transferred to Texas from the University of Houston. As the season went on, Matthew Golden was the one that became the top transfer wide receiver in that Longhorns wide receiver room. Bond didn't necessarily meet expectations at Texas. He has big playability. There's certainly not a question about that. If you're going to ask me to describe to you Browns fans, and because look, a lot of you guys maybe just watch the Cleveland Browns. Maybe you don't watch the league overall. So if you would like a little bit of a description, in my opinion, a little bit of comparison, in my opinion, of the type of player Isaiah Bond could be. One, you're not going to like so much. The second one, maybe so. But he could kind of be a Anthony Schwartz, Elijah Moore type. A little bit of those guys blended into one. Certainly not as fast with the overall foot speed that Anthony Schwartz had. Probably a little bit more of a consistent wide receiver. Probably runs a little better route tree. I've said before, and I say again, there is a little hiccup I see with Isaiah Bond. And for a guy who is as fast as Isaiah Bond is, sometimes, and look, playing with Quinn Ewers may have been part of the issue, but there are times where Isaiah Bond is not remaining at top speed throughout his routes through the catch point and then just basically being able to outrun people. Certainly, some of that could be attributed to the quarterback he played with last year at Texas. It's an interesting get for Cleveland. There's no question about it. There is. You don't necessarily get a guy with his type of athletic makeup, his type of foot speed available this time of year. The Browns obviously probably paid pretty well with a 3-year, about $3 million guaranteed contract. Certainly something that could be a hiccup in the Quinshon Judkins negotiations, but that's another conversation for another day. Bond did take the practice field today, just kind of getting his feet wet. Again, we're limited on what we can get from the media as far as practice goes, so we don't have the full enchilada, of course. Bond hinted at being possibly ready to play in this preseason game on Saturday. Certainly would need the work. He will make the 53-man roster. The 3-year guaranteed contract tells you that he will make this roster. How soon he's ready to contribute certainly has a couple of questions that need to be answered. How much of the playbook can Isaiah Bond have between last Sunday and week 1 against the Bengals, which would be 3 full weeks? Are you fully into a playbook in 3 weeks? You could be. But the thing is, when you're not a starter, like Bond is not going to be slated to be right away, you may have to learn more than one spot as far as the wide receiver is concerned, and alignments, of course. So that certainly makes the degree of difficulty of, mastering the book a little bit harder. He certainly spoke that he is excited and ready to go. Um, he did right away go up to Jerry Judy and kind of, there was the acquaintance between the two of them. It didn't sound like the two of them have much of a relationship other than maybe the brotherhood of both being players for the University of Alabama at some point in time. The other certainly would be, is there a few things the Browns think that Isaiah Bond can do for them right away? They've certainly been, toying with, jet motion. And we know how much, and it certainly has not been great at times. Coach Stefanski, loves to use, the Percy Harvin effect within his wide receivers. Isaiah Bond would probably be a pretty prime candidate for that. I've seen a lot of people talk about Isaiah Bond possibly having a role within the return game. I don't disagree that it sounds like a good idea. Isaiah Bond had 5 returns in high school. Not much came of them. He had 2 punt returns at Alabama. One was for like 34 yards. The other one amounted not much at all. So maybe he can be a returner, but to right now, there is no evidence proving that Isaiah Bond brings you return skills. So he's on the 53-man roster. Is he active for week 1 against the Bengals? Premature to tell. And, injuries always factor the way it goes from, 53 to 48, certainly. Um, I like the fact that they took a gamble on a guy like this. I've talked at length, for weeks now, of possible teams who could have wide receivers who are trade targets. One of those teams I really, really mentioned were the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Well, Chris Godwin is going to be out probably a month, if not more, most likely 2. Second-year wide receiver Jalen McMillan suffered a really bad sprained neck. They think there's a good chance Jalen McMillan misses the first half of the season. So all of a sudden, a team like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who had this really deep wide receiver room, all of a sudden that room is not as deep as it once appeared, which obviously makes trading with them look kind of difficult. The room as it stands: Jerry Judy, roster lock. Cedric Tillman, roster lock. Jamari Thrash, roster lock. Isaiah Bond, although having no resume whatsoever with the Browns, roster lock. Then you get to Gage Lavardane. Then, of course, you get to Deontay Johnson. You also get to DeAndre Carter and Caden Davis. The Deontay Johnson thing has just not gone as well as I expected it. I was hoping for more. Right now, there's nothing there that says Deontay Johnson is going to make this Cleveland Browns roster. Certainly could change on Saturday. I've been told by some people who are definitely more dialed in than me that DeAndre Carter is a roster lock. I don't disagree with them giving me that information. I do disagree with DeAndre Carter having a lock on a roster spot right now. He is 32 years old. Yes, he had a decent kickoff return average last year, but he only had 15 kick returns. His punt return average last year was less than all the people who combined to return punts for the Cleveland Browns last year. So just telling me he's locked up the return job, I don't see it. He hasn't played much wide receiver over the last 2 years, and he is now 32 years old. Would I rather have a Gage Lavardane right now than a DeAndre Carter? Lavardane has shown me he can return. He's contributed as a receiver. He's certainly shown some ability to handle the ball on end arounds. Yes, I would take Gage Lavardane right now over DeAndre Carter. Caden Davis. The thing with Caden Davis, and if you don't know, he's about to be 27 years old in September. So when we talk about the kid, Caden Davis is not necessarily a kid anyway. So tough spot there. And I still believe the Browns will be hunting the waiver wire or still looking to potentially trade for a wide receiver significantly younger than DeAndre Carter and maybe one who has had more production over the last couple of seasons than the now 32-year-old DeAndre Carter. So a lot of balls in the air today. Elliott Stabler at practice. Denzel Ward leaves practice early with some sort of injury of an arm, elbow, shoulder, one of those. Fingers crossed there, of course. Joe Flacco is now your starting quarterback and does want to get a little work in on Saturday in the preseason finale. And we've gotten the opportunity to listen to Isaiah Bond speak. And Isaiah Bond is now in practicing with the Cleveland Browns after his legal issues have, I guess we'll use the term, worked themselves out. We appreciate you all for the support here at the OBR and, of course, the OBR.com. Check into the VIP access. This is the best time to get it. You have the insider forums. You have Ask the Insiders. You also have it bundled. Your subscription is bundled with a subscription to Paramount Plus. Great, great thing to have right now as UFC is doing away with pay-per-views and going to stream all of their big fights. So go ahead and get on that. Of course, the support here for the OBR streaming network is fantastic, and we just continue to grow, and it is because of all of you. 7 o'clock tonight, like I said, there have been some changes here. You will get Pete Smith, Joe Mazzullo, debut of a new show. Joe's pretty good. Joe's got a lot of juice, and he's certainly got some, passionate thoughts about this Cleveland Browns franchise. So make sure you stick around for that at 7 o'clock. Of course, make sure you subscribe to the OBR on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR over on Twitch. All that being said, this has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. And we'll talk to y'all tomorrow.